I'm warming up early. We are in the home stretch. We have two great solo presentations for you, a panel, and then my conversation with Dr. Craig Wright. We're kicking it off on our final groupings here with one of the longest standing and best voices in Bitcoin. He is the CEO of MoneyButton. He's here to talk to you about all of the powerful new use cases that are possible because of data storage that's available on the BSV blockchain and digital rights management. Please. Big, warm round of applause. Lots of energy for Ryan Charles.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about digital rights management and really big data on the blockchain. So first, a bit of motivation here about what this is and what this is about. So the internet was invented some number of decades ago, 1970s and so on, and it was commercialized in the 1990s. Now, commercialization of the internet basically just means it became possible to start a business on there because, of course, this was originally created by the US government. So there's a sort of an issue with the internet, which is that by the nature of what it is, everything's free. There just isn't money built in. And so this created a sort of weird culture on the internet where there's this assumption that everything is free. And there's this philosophy of information should be free and things like that. That's fine if you have that philosophy, but if you are someone who's a creator or something like that, you really should have the ability to license and contract information however you choose. Sometimes things should cost money, and you decide as the creator. And Bitcoin enables us to basically fill in that missing piece of the internet. So first of all, let's think about this from the perspective of someone creating information. If you are someone writing an article, producing a movie, creating a podcast or something like that, you're a content creator. You're the owner. You created what the content. So you might want to sell the content for people to listen to one time and then not be able to sell it. Because what you might want to do is license it differently for people that want to resell it, or license it differently for someone that wants to publish it on their blog or something like that. So you're the creator. Not everything should be free. You should just have the power to license things as you decide. Not just the creator, but also everyone involved. So people, things like, an editor, distributors, publishers, and all these other things. All these people are involved in creating content and sort of creating contracts with one another about how they want to ultimately monetize their work, okay? So now let's think about this from the other perspective. DRM, digital rights management, has this sort of bad rap within sort of internet culture. And the reason for this is basically DRM didn't really work that well for a whole lot of reasons. We want it to be the case that, in this example here, if I play a video game, I buy a video game on Steam, and it's a single player video game, and I buy it with the intention that I'm going to be able to play it indefinitely, I shouldn't have to, if the company's servers go down, I should still be able to play my single player video game, right? Because what's happened is I have purchased this license, and the license says I have the ability to play this video game, single player, anytime I want to. I can't resell it, but I can play it myself. Well, this should be possible. And the problem is, with existing DRM solutions and all these sort of rigged systems that we have going back to the 90s, you can have things like you buy a video game and their server goes down and you can't play the video game even though it's a single player video game. Think about similar problems across all sorts of other areas. Things like, when you buy an article, it should be yours and you should continue to own it and be able to read it any other time. Meanwhile, if I do something like, resell it or have any type of contract at all, the contract should continue to hold indefinitely, independent of things like, servers going offline and things of the sort. So we want to give power both to the content creator, but also everyone involved in an agreement. As someone who participates in a contract, you own what you do, right? So that contract should hold. So we want to make sure that the people on both sides of the contract are winning in this situation. We want something where when you buy a video game, you are agreeing to something that you actually want. If you just want to play the video game, it should just work that way. Okay, so DRM actually, if you think about it, actually ends up becoming really expansive into other areas. So DRM is not just about things like, selling a video game or an article or a video on Netflix or something like that. It's actually also about things like internal access control inside of a company. So the same type of thing you might want to do outside of a company where you sell something to your customers, you might want to use basically the same exact technology inside to manage documents and content that you're creating. You could even imagine either literally inside of a corporation or a company hiring contractors and other companies and things like that, participating in contracts, not just for the end product, but also for all of the different pieces that go into what's ultimately going to be sold. So a world where everybody just basically uses the blockchain to sign contracts with one another, and the contracts are legally enforceable contracts where when payments happen, things are executed automatically and people get paid in a way that allows accountability. So the problem with existing solutions, there are a number of solutions to DRM going back to the 90s. So we have this idea of copy protection. Copy protection is a really bad word. I mean, this term comes from the idea that everything is free and therefore we have to protect copying. No, I mean, the way it should work is you should just be able to license things however you want to and stop with this default of everything being free. What it is it's you have the ability to license your content, your material, however you want to, and people that consume this stuff have the right to basically decide what they actually are willing to agree to. So looking at existing DRM solutions, they're super, super custom, incomplete things. Things like playing a video in your web browser, watching Netflix, video games on stream. They're all these one-off DRM things that are totally incompatible with everything else and don't have money. We can't combine the Steam DRM with, whatever, Netflix and all this stuff. They're totally different systems. So they're mutually incompatible. They don't have money. They're a tiny fraction of what needs to be done to actually fully solve this problem. So what we do with Bitcoin is we can have things like signatures and encryption and smart contracts. I can do things like I can sign content that I publish to the blockchain. So you can know that it's me. So I could do things like tweet on the blockchain, sign it. You follow me on the blockchain because it's signed by me. So you don't even need any particular app. You could write your own app if you want to. You probably want to. You probably won't. You're probably using some type of Twitter viewer for the blockchain or something like that. But in a world like that, where I'm publishing my content directly to the blockchain, this stuff is happening on a giant global distributed database. We don't have any of these problems. We have DRM systems that are compatible. We have things like when I agree to something, I see a contract, I sign it. I'm only agreeing to stuff that I actually agree to. If this company servers go down and I want to migrate something to somewhere else, or I create a piece of something using one system and I want to incorporate that with some type of legal contract into a different thing. So combining Netflix and Steam and producing a Hollywood movie and all the contracts that go into creating the material, licensing it, reselling it, and so on, everything in one unified system. So if you think about how to really solve all of these problems, the best way to do all of this is actually just Bitcoin with really, really, really big blocks. If we do it that way, we get everything we're looking for. We get you as a content creator or anything else involved on sort of the merchant side of this whole thing, you own your data properly. You own all of your stuff. If you stop liking Twitter, it doesn't matter, because if it's on the blockchain, you switch from Twitter number 1 to Twitter number 2 written by a different company. It's the same underlying data. That's how it should really work. When you create something, it's permanent, immutable on the blockchain, and you own it. You have the keys to all of that data. This applies to things like all the documents that you create, the audio that you create, and so on. It can include raw material, it can include finished products, as well as anything that you produce in combination with other people and all of their associated contracts and so on. Or to put it differently, I should be able to exit Twitter if I want to and still have my tweets and my following, because it doesn't matter whether I'm using Twitter, the app, they're following me on the blockchain, not on Twitter's centralized service. So, whoops. Okay. So we're solving all these. Okay, so Money Button is basically a embedded Bitcoin wallet that you can easily install onto any sort of website or app. So this allows you to, first of all, it's a Bitcoin wallet, so you can just send money to people. You can have a balance in here. Somebody can install this on an app. It can be very simple, like I'm giving a tipping example in this video, but it can also be extremely advanced. So we can do things like sign stuff inside of Money Button, and you're actually signing a contract, like the stuff Craig was talking about, giving us a few shout outs earlier. You can do things like actually sign a real legal contract. So think about that. I mean, you're not just doing things like, a program. You're actually, instead of signing a contract on paper or doing it on DocuSign or something like that, you're using the blockchain for all of these things. You're swiping money button to sign, encrypt things. All that stuff doesn't matter. All that matters is the user understands what it is that they're agreeing to. And when you agree, you swipe money button. Everything goes on chain. Okay, the contracts, the money, all of this stuff with really, really big blocks, and all of the contracts and money being enforced automatically on the blockchain. So an important part of this is Paymail, which we announced yesterday. We've been putting out all the more sort of blog posts, specs, code, our implementation inside Money Button tomorrow. What it is basically email that supports Bitcoin. This is important because what it is really an identity system that is compatible with the way that people are already doing identity in the real world today. You probably have an email account that you probably use to sign into other services and serve as a sort of backup identity system for when other things go wrong. People already use email this way. Email addresses have exactly the properties that we need to build infrastructure that allows us to solve every single problem related to identity. That's what Paymail is. It's the world's most practical solution to every single identity problem. You use your Paymail to sign stuff. This is your name. And you can even provably have your real name next to your Paymail, along with your avatar and things like that. So when you follow people on the blockchain, it looks like Twitter, but it's way better because you actually own your data. And the people that follow you are not locked into Twitter. They can switch and they're still following you because everything is on a global distributed database that everyone can access. That's what Paymail makes possible, all right? You're gonna be using this identity for everything. It is, I could go on about all sorts of things. This talk is about DRM, but if you think about how you use the exact same technology for many of the problems that you face in life, one of the ideas we like is things like when we go to another country, you're not from Canada, you visit here, you bring your passport. Wouldn't it be cool if you just had to bring your phone? Because your phone has keys and you can swipe money button as you cross the border and provably authenticate your actual government identity. No more of these things like buying a plane ticket and having or a boarding pass and it's actually a physical piece of paper and stuff like that. All of these weird inefficiencies go away when basically users have their keys and you can just start building protocols that solve every single one of these problems. So what we're doing with Money Button, what we're doing with yours.org as well, we're all about this philosophy. I mean, we're making it possible for people to basically just plug in these technical solutions into apps that either already exist or that you're building to leverage things like identity and signatures and encryption and payments, okay? The end user sees Money Button. It's very simple. It costs some tiny amount of money to do these things. So the end user, it's very simple and plugs into any type of app, like a document, movies, any type of app that you want to incorporate this type of technology into. But under the hood, all of this stuff is exposed to the application developer or to the business that are actually solving these problems. If you want to solve DRM, you create a DRM app that plugs Money Button in there. If you want to solve things like even supply chain, things like that are actually quite similar when you look at how it works technically, plug Money Button into that. This is what they use to sign, okay? So that's what we're doing. I mean, let's create a world where everybody owns their data, and that's exactly what the blockchain is. That's what it ultimately empowers. It's not about making everything cost money. It's about empowering you to create stuff and you decide what you do with it, okay? That's it. Thank you. Right, I should have asked beforehand, but I don't know how much time there is for questions. I got like 1 minute and 30 seconds left. Do we take questions here, or does anybody have any questions? Let's see, one question? Yes. Great question. Question is, are we only on the real Bitcoin? The answer is yes. The reason is, the only way this makes any sense is at scale. And at scale, there's only going to be one of these things. I mean, it's going to be, if you run the numbers on this, we're going to have really, really large blocks. And the only way you make all these different systems compatible is if everyone's using the same system. So it's one protocol. That's all it is. The original Bitcoin is just a protocol for engaging with other people. So under the hood, everything's Bitcoin. We're not going to use a different thing. Go ahead. Well, you own your data includes you own your money. So if you want to hodl, you can hodl. If you want to spend, you can spend. I mean, you don't have to encourage, what you do is you want to encourage people to spend, you got to create something that's worth more to them than their Bitcoin, okay? If you can't do that, why the hell would they buy it from you? I mean, this is how everything works in the world, right? When I go to the store and I want to buy something, it's because I'm convinced that that thing that I want to purchase is worth more to me than that amount of money. That works with Bitcoin. I mean, it's not any different. In the back there, yes? Okay, so the question is, can you use your own domain name for Paymail? And the answer is yes. Paymail is basically, we made it in such a way that, first of all, any host of Paymail doesn't have your private keys. It can, but it doesn't have to. It has your public keys. It has only the portion of the public keys that you want to. So moneybutton.com does not see your private keys. We see your public keys. But the protocol for Paymail allows us to do things like, you could just set up your own domain name and use the protocol if you want to. Most people probably won't bother to do that. The more important thing is you can do things like own your own domain name and then actually allocate that service to MoneyButton. So in the same way that you would buy your domain name at GoDaddy, set up a different, like a host at DreamHost or something like that, and a different thing for email like Google. And what you'll have is a different provider for Paymail, which is MoneyButton or Handcash or Centbee or anybody that wants to build support for this. So MoneyButton will become a Paymail provider. So you can use any domain name you want to. Your identity can be your name at yourdomainname.com. It's your business, but it's using MoneyButton's technology. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much. Let's really underscore that. Let's congratulate Ryan Charles, his MoneyButton team, and their collaborators from the Wallet Workshop Bitcoin Association ran on really a significant achievement in simplicity, which is hard, but so powerful. Our next presentation, I am super excited for you to hear. I had the privilege of helping navigate through an investment deal that Calvinaire did with their company. They're here to talk to you about game battles on the BSV blockchain with their company Kronoverse, really coming up with fascinating, powerful, and creative uses of the BSV blockchain given its greater scaling and data capacity. Please welcome from Kronoverse, their founder and CEO, Adam Kling, and chief architect, David Case.
Ready to talk about some games today. So back in the 90s, I was always in the arcade. It was pretty much my second home. And I'd play every game in there, but I'd always gravitate towards the competitive fighting games, like Mortal Kombat. And this is where all the competition and the excitement was in the arcade. There was always big groups of people forming around these games. And this was really my first taste of esports back then. And I never knew that it was going to grow into $1 billion industry this year in 2019. So in the last decade, competitive gaming has exploded. Millions of players and spectators are now gathering around these things. You have prizes in the millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars. And it's becoming the preferred entertainment for the millennial and Generation Z gamers. So this starts to make me wonder, with so much prize money at stake, what's really happening inside of the source code? How are winners and losers really decided in these? So when you play a game today, games are very easy to pick up and play now. They're ubiquitous. But the back end is very private and closed off. We don't really know what's happening inside of that. And we think there's a better way forward. And again, if you remember that, if there's millions of dollars at stake with these games, using BSV could actually change how this outcome. So when you play a game, every choice that you make, it has consequences on there. But what if you just took those choices and map it to the blockchain and store permanently? This could actually give new benefits for both the players and the developers and unlock new gaming insights Think about analyzing player psychology. Why do they do the things inside of games? Or maybe new game styles, like the latest one is Battle Royale, but maybe you could figure out some new ones from this data. But best of all that I like is that not one company would own this data. It would be accessible by everyone. So how do we fix this transparency problem? You know, when we play these games, we're forced to trust these developers with how everything works. And the we have developed a system to link these player actions together. So they're always dependent upon each other, similar to how a blockchain works. So this actually gives you a way to analyze the game and why someone won and why they lost. So if we're storing all of this game data, all of your items and your achievements, all the times you've won and lost, we can start to do some pretty cool things now. So imagine going back years ago and replaying the same game that you played late at night. You could start to do that because you're really only reading data from the blockchain. But what you could also do is start to actually watch live games anywhere in the world. So imagine going to, let's say, Japan and seeing what's happening over there and what are they playing and how are they playing it. Like watching a pro or even a walkthrough for a game, you could start doing that. And then you can start thinking about Twitch. Twitch really takes video games and then they overlay a video feed on that and they monetize that content. So this could actually create new content to publish to new platforms. So the gaming multiverse is really the holy grail for video gamers. And then we were inspired by the book and movie Ready Player One. And in that, it paints a picture of a virtual world where you can jump from game to game. It's completely independent. And you have to start thinking about games in a new way. They're all interconnected. Think of like universal objects. So games have to become modular or pieces of a whole. And then it also needs to be open. Anyone needs to be able to jump in and create in this game multiverse. Think of it as like a new protocol. Marketplaces have to form where developers can sell these items or assets into the market to generate revenue. And then players should be able to buy those and sell them with other gamers. And then this could actually form a new economy that provides real incentives for people to participate in this multiverse and maybe even real jobs for people. Now, this multiverse has to persist outside of the original game. Think of an environment, for example, where a player can plant a seed of a tree and it would start to grow into a full tree completely independent of that original developer. So think of a game connecting into that environment. And then the other thing is that developers need a new revenue source. We're too often with like freemium games now, where they introduce pain points just to get you to pay up, basically. And we can actually offer new ways to monetize efforts from a developer. So think of like license agreements built into game objects to where you could actually create something and stick it out in this multiverse. And as it's used, you could actually get royalties back. Or what if you're a modder? A modders like to enhance or make something better. So you could actually take a complete game or even pieces of games and formulate them together. And all that revenue could go back to the original creators of those assets. So Alan Kay said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that's why here at Kronoverse, we're building the future of gaming. Now, I'm going to hand it over to David, and he's going to go over to the technical overview of the Kronoverse platform.
Thanks, Adam. So people have been talking all day about wanting to make things more boring, and we're kind of going the opposite way there. So, so I want to start by asking, what makes a game? You can play around a kitchen table with your friends and family, or you can play online with 1,000 strangers. You can play against not people at all, but NPCs and bots, or pre-programmed monsters of varying intelligence. Or you can play by yourself in solitaire or Candy Crush. Games can be cooperative, where you work together to save the planet from an alien invasion. Or they can be competitive. Competitive among friends for some bragging rights and maybe a small wager. Or competitive professionally for big money, sponsors, and championships. Games can take place on a static board. They can take place in a dynamic environment or across many worlds. Games can be turn-based, they can be time-based, they can be continuous. They can be finite, or they can run forever. Games can involve skill, chance, or a combination of both. A few things that all games have in common are rules, actions, and some form of state. Now, state is the status of a game at a specific moment in time. So this includes things like who's playing, whose turn is it, how is the board laid out, what are a player's health or what resources does a player have, and how much time is left. Players interact with this game by taking actions, which can be something like choosing which card to play in a card game, or what piece to move and where to move it to. Rules define the logic by which a player's actions are used to modify the game state. So if I'm playing a game of Super Mario Brothers, and I choose to take the action to jump, and the game state shows that I'm currently standing underneath a coin box, well, the rules of that game are going to update that state to say that I now have one more coin than I did before, and that that coin box is now empty. Rules can change the state in any way, as simple as adding a coin, or as complex as warping me to an entirely new world and changing the dynamics of the game in any fashion. And how we've got this implemented, game state can be rebuilt at any time by simply replaying every action that has happened throughout the course of a game. So if we take the example of a friendly game of chess, chess is very simple to implement, can be done in a peer-to-peer fashion because the rules are always the same. The game setup is always the same. The state simply consists of where are the pieces and whose turn is it. And the actions don't require any outside information. It's simply what the player chooses to do. And a game like that can be implemented really simply. What if we make that a little more complex? If we take that example of chess and we make it a competitive game where we need to randomly figure out which player goes first. And we need to set a timer on each player, that each player gets 1 minute to act. And lastly, what if we want to allow players to put wagers on the game? To do these things, we need some more information than what we can just get from the players themselves. To do that, we've built a tool we call Chronicler. So Chronicler is an agent, an autonomous agent that just runs and watches players' actions. It calculates the state changes, and then it provides additional input to the game. With this, we can provide services such as escrows to allow players to contribute funds for fees or bonds or wagers into a game. And Chronicler will pay those out based on the rules that are implemented in a given game. Chronicler can also provide oracles to pull information from outside of the game in, such as local weather conditions, or to validate ownership of tokens on a blockchain. Chronicler also provides timestamping, random number generation, and is actively involved in managing the flow control of the game. So, crypto fights is not what I meant to say. So this stuff is only possible because we're doing this on Bitcoin SV. Bitcoin SV provides a number of unique features that are not available anywhere else, which is the only reason we can build this the way we have. It starts with the large op return support. So this allows us to actually store all the rules of the game as JavaScript code that exists in op return in Bitcoin transactions. That code is signed by the developers, so at any point, the clients that are running it can know that the code they are running is what the developer intended for them to run. It's also immutable, so it's not changeable, and it's fully auditable in that anyone can figure out the logic that's going on behind the scenes. Additionally, player actions are implemented as Bitcoin transactions as well. So every move that a player makes is a signed Bitcoin transaction, where the player's keys have secured the fact that these are their intentions. And because we've got large op return, we can support far more complex actions than we could otherwise. How Kronoverse is implemented, just like the Bitcoin blockchain itself, every game is made up of a signed chain of transactions. So currently on Bitcoin SV, well, currently as of last week anyways, it costs about 5/100ths of a penny to send a dust transaction, which is the smallest transaction you can send. A similar transaction in Ethereum or Bitcoin Core would cost anywhere from tens of cents to several dollars if the network's really busy. Bitcoin SV's price point allows us to have Chronicler actively involved in the game and provide, between every player action, provide a transaction which provides that additional information. So how this is done, Chronicler actually watches the player's transactions, runs the rules that come off the blockchain to produce a new state. And with that state, they will actually transfer control to the next player or players whose turn it is to act by spending a dust transaction to those players. Those players then, the only way they can take their action is by spending that one transaction to identify their next move. And this allows us to rely on network double spend protections to fully secure the game and ensure that we've got one straight chain of events. Chronicler also provides a transaction API. What this means is player transactions don't get broadcast directly to miners. Player transactions go directly from our game client to our Chronicler service and are validated immediately locally, and then we can respond to those players' transactions. At that point, as soon as we validate it, we can broadcast it to the Bitcoin network, but we don't need to wait for it to propagate in order for us to start processing it, which means we can respond in very, very fast times. We're competitive with standard client-server game models. So now I want to talk a little bit about crypto fights. And I want to walk you through the transaction flow of how transactions work on Bitcoin from crypto fights. So we have player 1 up top, player 2 at the bottom, and in the middle are the transactions that the Chronicler sends to a battle. So we start off by players making a commit transaction, which well, actually, let me back up. Crypto fights is a game where you build a fighter, and that fighter is configured with the stats that you choose, the image you choose, what you want them to look like, how you want them to behave. And those fighters exist as tokens on the blockchain. We also have a number of weapons and armor, which also exist as tokens on the blockchain. So when you commit to a battle, you actually are selecting your fighter, your weapons, your armor that you want to put into a battle and fight. So the commit transaction will take the configuration that you've chosen, generate a hash of that, and submit that to the blockchain. That can also include wager information if you want to put a bet on your fight. So once Chronicler has received those commit transactions, it will match them into a battle and generate the beginning of the process. From there, it'll transfer flow of the battle back to both players. They will, through an init transaction, commit their actual configuration. Now, we don't have them commit their configuration at the beginning because we don't want to reveal how you're going to be configured to your opponents before you've got a chance to lock that in. So then players will spend the dust transaction they got given in their init to submit to submit to the battle, and things begin. So Crypto Fights uses an initiative-based system to determine who goes first. So to do that, a dice is rolled for both players, and the stats are combined with the players. The dice roll is combined with the player stats and the weapon stats to determine an initiative score. Whoever has the highest initiative score goes first. So Chronicler will spend a transaction that provides the random numbers used for that dice roll, as well as the flow-controlled dust transaction to the next player, in this case, player 1. So we have a battle now. We're started. When player 1 decides that they want to attack, they will sign a transaction that is an ACT transaction that says, attack my opponent. So when Chronicler receives that, they will then look up that attack function off the blockchain, take the player's signed transaction that tells what they want to do, and provide another random number into that function, which will then generate a new state. When that state comes out, it will have updated to say whose turn it is now. And so if both players are still alive, the process will continue, and Chronicler will send a dust transaction to the next player, who can then take a turn. But if one of the players is dead, that changes. And we don't flow to another player. Instead, we will pay out the wager that the players have put on that battle. So now I want to actually show you what this looks like. So this is from an alpha build. It is not, the players at this point are just attacking each other automatically. So there's no really user interface, and this is not a final user interface. But, so here we see both players selecting from their fighter, well, one player first, and the next player. Okay, so they are going to get matched. On the right-hand side, what you're going to see are the log of the actual Bitcoin transactions flowing by. So here you see up top, they've committed, they got matched. We have the begin transaction. And what I want to show you right here is how quickly, from a player taking an action till we can respond to resolve that action. There's no optimization being done yet, and yet within, so let's see, boom, boom. Within half second, They've submitted their transaction to our server. We've processed it. We've validated the Bitcoin transaction is valid. And then we respond to it and update the state of the battle. So then we're going to show you quickly, as Adam mentioned, things are fully recorded to the blockchain. So this is an example of someone finding a previous battle that they have fought. And you can then pull that up and watch that. Now, this isn't writing new transactions at this point. This is simply reading the transactions that have already happened from the blockchain. So we are really excited about what this enables us to do, both with developing our own games and as well as opening up the ecosystem to other developers, where we can provide the services of providing random number generation, providing the things that they need to be able to calculate the new states of their game. But things don't rely on us. The code lives on the blockchain and the protocol is all open. So if we go away, someone else can stand up services that do exactly what we do, and the ecosystem can live on without us. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. I'm really excited to see that launch. I think it's going to be a great win for Bitcoin SV. Next, we have a panel to talk about something I think is very critical for the growth of Bitcoin. As I like to say in speeches, it's time for Bitcoin to grow up. And that includes creating an environment where financial institutions and traditional financial investors feel comfortable operating, investing, or supporting Bitcoin, because that will actually really help it grow and take Bitcoin to a much higher level. So far, a lot of the traditional financial institutions have been wary or cautious about getting involved with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. And I think we need to figure out how to solve that so that they're more comfortable and we can achieve adoption by financial institutions. Joining me to discuss this are three great leaders in the space. First, from South Africa, he is the other co-founder of Centbee. Please welcome Angus Brown. Next, he's from here in Toronto, but he's moved to London to do what I used to have to do, be CEO of nChain. Please welcome David Washburn. And another local, he was CEO and co-founder of FRNT Financial. Please give it up for Stephane Ouellette. Now, all three of these gentlemen come from what I would call sort of more traditional financial or financial institution backgrounds. I wanted to first start by asking each of you to just give the audience just a quick overview of who you are in terms of your experience coming into the Bitcoin world. Angus.
Thanks, Jimmy. Great to be here, everybody. My background is about 20 years of banking, and that comes out of even starting banking in the world's first bank-backed digital currency in 2000. So I've been in retail banking and had quite a lot of experience in launching digital financial products, including neobanks, challenger banks, digital KYC businesses based down in South Africa, partly South African, live in Johannesburg. And Centbee as a business is about using Bitcoin SV to create the next payment systems, to create the next evolution in payments.
Okay. Great. Now, so David, a lot of people in this room already know about nChain, of course, and it's great to be able to work with you on the future growth of Bitcoin SV. Can you tell the audience, since they're meeting you for the first time for a lot of these people, your background and what brought you into nChain?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jimmy. So I didn't quite hit the 20-year mark in financial services, but I think the clock ticked to 18 years. Primarily in the equity capital markets. Most recently, I ran the Canadian operations of a global investment bank. So through that period of time, I also had the experience of being able to turn research into money. So the institutional equity research business is really similar to some of the core foundations of what we're up to at nChain. It starts off as what might be closer to an academic exercise than dollars, and now it's about figuring out how we turn that into money. So at nChain, we've got what in my 27 days at the company, I think is literally the most advanced research team in the space in the world. So it's a tremendous starting point from my perspective to help build this business. We've also got one of the most experienced engineering teams there. So this is a really magic experience here. So looking at, from my perspective in what I'll call old finance, we've got a really unique opportunity here.
Okay, Stephane, tell us about you and also what FRNT Financial does.
Thanks, Jimmy. I have a similar background to Dave. I was working on Bay Street for about 10 years. I was an equity trader at BMO Capital Markets. Eventually, I ended up running the hedge fund sales trading operation there and took on additional products like equity options and equity swaps. About 18 months ago, we founded FRNT Financial with the goal of targeting institutions in the space. And our particular angle is that we think a huge blocker to institutional involvement in the space, which has been minimal so far, talking traditional asset managers, has been that they have a lot of frictions with owning crypto assets themselves, whether they're legal or operational, which I'll get into a little bit later. So we've created a derivatives platform that we think removes those frictions and allows institutional investors to be involved and get exposure to the space. I'd also like to announce that we've recently that the Air Group has led a round for us. And so what that means for this room is that we're going to be having products among some, but that an institutional investor that couldn't otherwise own BSV will now be able to own a BSV derivative and get that same exposure and explain their views, such as if you were a very smart institution and a couple of days ago you thought that BSV was undervalued, would you have been able to participate? So thank you, Jimmy.
Okay, great. So another great investment from Calvin Ayre and the Air Group for Bitcoin SV. Congratulations. And it is part of the efforts we're making with Calvin and his group to bring more support to Bitcoin SV outside of the, quote, Bitcoin world, right? Going to bigger enterprises, traditional financial institutions. So I want to ask each of you, from your background and experience, why you think it is that the traditional financial institutions and markets have been hesitant to support or adopt in some form Bitcoin, particular other cryptocurrencies. What are the hurdles? Angus?
Okay, I'll take the first one. I think the word crypto, we're quite used to it in the crypto community. Think about it in the most ordinary person. The word crypto is a bad thing. You know, cryptos are hackers. Hackers are people who steal money from people.
Scary sounding.
So it's a scary word. It's that sort of stuff. Now, bankers, and I come from a traditional banking perspective, we don't like scary. Our job is about protecting money, keep people away from stealing money. So cowboys, crypto, scary stuff. So you've got a natural resistance, just if you look at the audience, the people in banking who would be quite nervous of approaching something like that. Then you have the regulatory framework, that you don't have a regulatory framework. So banks are used to, they have a central bank, a regulator who says, this is how you approach it, this is how you tell me what you've done, and this is how I measure what you've done. Now you've got something that isn't clear. So they will naturally be quite scared of going into that. The other thing is habit. You find that banking systems are typically been out there for 20 years or so. So bankers have been working on the same thing, which literally for the last 20 years, using the same tech, with maybe a better screen in front of it, but it is the same tech, the same processes. So now you're bringing a new thing, a new process as well. So there's several different dimensions of change that you're seeing that banks are having to face.
Kind of like lawyers, really slow to change, right? Yeah, slow. Dave, what do you think?
If I can add on to what Angus was talking about, one of the big issues with any large financial institution is risk management. So trying to understand how the crypto world, Bitcoin in particular, can fit into the risk management structure is an absolutely critical component of driving adoption. So you think about a couple of components around, trading cryptocurrencies. So it's either trading for the bank's account or for the client's account. Any way you slice it, overnight, that's part of the capital configuration of the bank. The VAR models, the value at risk models, the other risk management tools go completely tilt when you input the volatility that we see on most cryptocurrencies. So they're used to dealing with much more stable, price-stable instruments, and it throws everything completely off. So it's requiring a whole new generation of risk managers and operations professionals that come into it with open eyes, and at the end of the day, new models are going to be required. The other side of the coin is about what it takes for banks and large financial institutions to use blockchain infrastructure to make their business better. And I think that's largely about education. We're starting to cross some of those barriers now.
Yeah. The volatility point, I think, is a really good one because, we all know cryptocurrency prices are volatile, mostly because it's based on speculation, let's be honest, as opposed to real utility. And I think that's why we, as leaders of the Bitcoin SV world, are so focused on not talking about price, but talking about building real usage, because my belief is you need lots of real usage to generate an actual real value that is more stable. Hopefully it continues to grow over the years, but is stable so that it actually has less volatility and makes people more comfortable using it. So it all starts with utility, not even anything else. Stephane, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that volatility is a huge component of what's kept what has kept adoption in general. It's been a stunted adoption. And, specifically, this was one of the reasons why we founded Front Financial, was that, we thought that there were some very clear blockers to why institutions who in traditional financial markets are often there to regulate some of that volatility. They make very educated bets. They're essentially the experts in the space. If something's getting too hyped up, that creates some volatility to the upside, or something's getting dumped for no reason, it's usually the institutions that come in and, support those things so they don't get to, so that you don't get those massive swings and drops. They're policing the ecosystems, for example. So I think that really investment products that are going to allow regulated investment products that are going to allow institutions to get in there and play the role that they usually play without having to set up a whole desk to trade crypto and have operations that they may not be comfortable with. I think it's really going to be this new evolution of products, and we're trying to build some of them that allow institutions to come in, police the marketplace, reduce volatility, and grow adoption generally.
So, as you know, I like to talk about building a regulation-friendly environment. And unlike other crypto camps, I think we are very open about talking about the subject of regulation. What do you all think is needed in the regulatory landscape worldwide, or in particular jurisdictions, to make it more comfortable for financial institutions to come into this market? I know, Angus, you've been talking to regulators, right, in your jurisdictions. Tell us about your experience.
Well, I think the first step is education. Given what I've said before about how they generally don't know too much about these things and haven't been exposed to it that much, so you do have to do education. And at Centbee, we spend probably a third of our time educating regulators, merchants, integrators, people around us in the community about what is Bitcoin, how does it work, what does it do, and dispelling a lot of the myths, because the myths still persist. Bad news and myths carry on. So education is the first one. What I look for in return, and I ask for it quite explicitly, is say, give us clarity. Regulation means to make regular. To make regular means to make it safe, to make it comfortable, to move away from, the advocates to get to the early adopters, to get to the late adopters. You need to be able to make it comfortable, to make it safe, to make it feel that it's something that you don't have to be scared about. So that's what I look for from the regulator, specifically clarity.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, I think education is really lacking in the regulatory bodies by and large. They don't understand the paradigm, and there's no experience to work from. So they're trying to look back in their experience with previous types of products and apply that framework. And it's not going to work. It's not the same. There are core principles that need to be applied, but it's not going to fit piece by piece. And at the end of the day, when the regulatory bodies are trying to draw on members from the participating institutions, they have a tough time. So typically, if you look at any of the composition of the regulatory bodies, there are people with 20 plus years of experience in the business. How many years of experience does anyone have in crypto and financial markets? It's not double digits. Right. Yeah, so there's not a lot of pool to draw from.
Stephane?
Yeah, I think that the regulators could do well in terms of really figuring out the act, as opposed to just putting blanket kind of, all this scares us and, it's problematic and we need to figure it out, to really isolate what are the issues that could be, what are the parts of the ecosystem that could really be problematic for retail investors that could be predatory, as opposed to, what the existing mentality is right now is like, we're going to regulate all of this. We haven't figured it out yet, so no one can move. For corporations that have, a small group of shareholders, why not let them experiment and be big boys? And if they end up doing something that ends up losing their shareholders' money, everyone signed on for this ride. It's a high risk space. Let us go. So there's so many innovations out there that aren't even getting off the ground in jurisdictions like the U.S. and Canada. They're having to go elsewhere, having to jump through all these hoops. And really they're backed by some wealthy individuals or they're big boy institutions, and they're still having to fight these battles when they could be innovating.
So one of the things I have personally been doing in my role now is reviewing and commenting on draft legislation that certain countries are considering for digital asset businesses, essentially virtual currency business legislation. I want to ask you all, and so this is very top of my mind, examples of things and whether you think there needs to be specific laws or regulation about them. One, should there be more specific regulation or licensing requirements for cryptocurrency exchanges?
I think yes. I think the points at which the real currency world, fiat currency world, and the Bitcoin currency world intersect, those are points of risk. That's particularly when it comes to money laundering risk. And the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, have written a lot of papers around that, and also comes into where different jurisdictions intersect with each other. And those are points of risk. So they've picked that out as an area, and FATF have actually written quite a lot of position papers, including quite recently very detailed position papers, even distinguishing between custodial and non-custodial wallets. So our education efforts are paying up when you're actually seeing them coming through with specific things. So I absolutely see that the KYC requirements are coming through onto exchanges, and I think they're going to come on for more than just exchanges. I think they're going to come into the custodial wallets as well as the exchanges as well.
And that would require, in your mind, those exchanges and custodial wallets to comply with AML as well as KYC requirements.
Yes.
And do you think that should apply also to crypto only exchanges or only crypto to fiat exchanges?
It's a good question, and I think it depends on how much risk there is. Particularly in the crypto to crypto space, you can say that the currency itself has left the domain of a regulator in that space. So from a domain perspective, we often look at it, that's quite safe, but there's still the ability to do money laundering across that. And I think money laundering is a real risk. I certainly have absolutely no intention of supporting any money laundering, terrorist financing. These are things we need to combat, and we need to be actively participating. And that doesn't mean we have to follow the way the banks have done it. Sometimes the banks do things really clunkily, and having been in banks, I've done things clunkily too. But there are better ways to do it, which still achieve the same objective.
Let's go to Stephane first this time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that to your follow-up question to Angus about crypto to crypto or crypto to fiat, I do think that crypto to fiat on ramps are should be a much larger concern of the regulators than crypto to crypto, and I think they probably are, and that's why people have focused so much on crypto to crypto recently, because it's easier to do.
Right.
The KYC process on crypto is very complicated. I mean, there's one side, the part that's usually regulated is the fiat leg as opposed to the actual crypto leg. So there's nothing that, like when an OTC desk gets crypto from a wallet, there's really not a lot of things that they can do to verify that wallet. So I think that, like Angus said, we need to be doing a whole lot to make sure that there aren't like objectively illicit activities that are happening within our ecosystem. It's bad for everything. But I also think we need to think a lot about what that means right now. And hopefully there's solutions down the line that'll make this all easier for us.
Dave,
if I can hop on, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because we talk about these businesses as exchanges, but compared to traditional financial markets, they're acting much more closely like brokers than they are exchange. So if you use an equity market, for example, the exchange doesn't face any of the customers that ever have any risk. The exchange faces professional brokers, and individuals deal with brokers. There's a layer of risk. A lot of offerings are covered under legal risk documents. They're very different scenarios. So I think the regulatory framework needs to be developed, but it needs to be developed with fresh eyes and not trying to replicate existing platforms.
Okay, what about tokens now? There's a lot of talk in different government agencies and jurisdictions about the need to either issue guidance or perhaps even new regulations or laws applicable to ICOs and other security type tokens. Do you think we need new or special laws about them, or do you think existing laws govern clearly enough?
It's I'm certainly not an expert on the token space, but Centbee just recently provided 46 pages worth of guidance to the Reserve Bank and the National Treasury around like what should be done around that space. And one of the things we were suggesting was to put a whitelist in there, because 2,000 odd cryptocurrencies and counting. There needs to be some mechanism. I think creating a blacklist might be a difficult way of approaching it. Perhaps creating a whitelist of those that are easier would be easier to manage. But at least it's something that I think we should create the concept of. There are whitelists and blacklists, and maybe there's a process to manage that. And I think securities regulators need to be protecting customers, and we must help them.
Dave?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fundamental, especially as we move away from, in the concept of tokens, away from the ICO sort of discussion and onto tokenized assets, fractional assets. And we're getting into things that historically hadn't been able to be transacted between people. If you look at high-end fine art as an example, a lot of people talking about tokenizing art, developing marketplaces for that. I think it's a really interesting concept. It's quite seductive as an idea, and it's really interesting. The fine art market is looked at by many people as being, a almost legitimate money laundering situation. So it's the most appreciated asset out there, probably except vintage wine. And there's very little money trail. So this could actually be a really good thing if we can start to put identity, KYC onto some of these high value assets that potentially have a bit of hair.
Right, because otherwise, wealthy person buys fine art somewhere, moves it somewhere else, sells it, and takes out the money that way. Yeah. So, Stephane.
Yeah, I have a bit of a different take on this one. I'm not so concerned with ICOs themselves and needing to recreate the existing IPO framework within the ICOs. What I do think that the regulators should be very diligent in dealing with is fraud. Like, the issue is fraud. The crowdsourcing dynamic that's involved in the ICOs, I think is, very interesting and potentially the way of the future, an alternative financing route. But, the biggest issues in these things is that people took off with money that did something completely different than they hadn't done. And, how many cases are we seeing where these people are, outright accused and tried for fraud? I mean, it's rare. So, I think that almost the existing legal system, for the most part, can deal with some of these issues, but it definitely needs to be policed in a much more aggressive way than it is, into looking like, what did you say you're going to do with the money? What did you end up doing?
Right.
That's not right.
Right. Yeah. My view of it, from the former lawyer's perspective, is that tokens are governed by existing laws about securities. There may be some guidance that securities agencies need to provide on how existing securities law in their jurisdiction applies in the cryptocurrency token space. But I don't think you need to run around and enact a whole new set of laws. You're just applying, like in any new technology advancement, existing law to an advancement in technology. Let's talk about tokenizing real world assets, something that might be more comfortable for financial institutions. People talk about everything from tokenizing gold to tokenizing oil or commodities, and we support the idea of tokenizing real world assets. Do you think that is potentially an asset class or source of investment that financial institutions would be more comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, I think tokenized real assets is going to be an explosive growth area over the next decade for sure. And there are a number of reasons, ranging from, on one end of the spectrum, providing the ability for speculation on the underlying assets. And number two, having a much more real-time, low-friction risk management tool, either for truly hedging for producers or consumers on the commodity example, or from financial institutions. Ultimately, reducing the friction points in those parts of business, increase the velocity of money in the system, and ultimately that's a really, really good thing. Craig and I were talking in the back earlier about, the concept of a lot of early blockchain solutions were to take out people to make efficiencies that way. I think that's a really short-sighted thing. These tokenized underlying assets ranging from currencies to commodities can allow a rapid acceleration of capital in the financial system. It's about getting this system right, and I think the foundation's there.
Stephane, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I echo what Dave says in terms of getting it right. Moving kind of from the way that, assets are traditionally transacted to, a completely, new operational system, the way assets are transacted. I view a bit of a movement from the petroleum to the electric car. It's not, if the electric car is a little bit better on one component versus another component, it's probably not going to result in a huge paradigm shift to this new element that requires, a complete infrastructural upgrade. Sure. It has to be better on every component. It has to be faster on settlement. It has to be just as easy on a regulatory standpoint. It has to be accessible to just as many investors. And once we get there, then it is an obvious transition that's going to happen, that is going to happen down the line. But it really needs to develop to the point where it's better everywhere. Otherwise, I think it will, for a period, remain niche.
So we have a lot of people in this room who are building projects. They're developers or they're entrepreneurs. Do you have any suggestions about things the Bitcoin SV society could be building technically, or in terms of new products that would make it easier or more enticing for financial institutions to get into the Bitcoin world?
Yeah, I certainly think from a payment system, my background is really around the payment system space. There was a diagram earlier which spoke about there's the weeds of how the technology and the protocol works, and then there's the business layer above it, which is how my logistics works in a logistics business. There's that missing middle in between. And that's where I think from a Bitcoin business perspective, we need to be adding ecosystem players in here. These are people who help merchants connect into payment systems. They help logistics providers tokenize assets. There's a layer of business to business service providers here. Don't try and replace the business at the top. You've got a great protocol at the bottom that works over there. So it's business opportunities to me that sit in between, like a Bitcoin payment provider where you can provide payment services and make sure merchants get their fiat currency, but you take care of all the risk. To me, those are the ecosystem opportunities that exist now.
Okay, David?
Yeah, I think ultimately we want to make it so that we don't even notice that it's there for the entrepreneur, for the developer. It doesn't need to be a thing. It should be seamless ability to build their business, finance their business, and integrate into as broad a financial system as humanly possible. So making those points of entry as close to seamless and unnoticeable as possible, I think is really important in getting the part of the community that wants to build something, people that aren't software engineers, people that aren't developers, but they have an idea and it can be enhanced by Bitcoin SV.
Stephane?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective as someone who is transacting on a large basis, one of the big blockers is just how scary it is to trade cryptocurrency. I mean, and to transact in cryptocurrency. I mean, on a smaller level, but moving large sizes of cryptocurrency.
Do your clients get scared?
Yeah.
What kinds of questions do they ask?
Well, like it is freaky to put in a wallet address, and if you have the wrong number, the wrong digit there, and it happens to be that happens to be another wallet, then there's no recourse.
Right. You can't get it back.
There's no one to call. There's one of the reasons why the banking system is so incumbent is that I can call them. Worst case scenario, they can sort it all out. If someone steals from me, they'll sort it out. The credit company will sort it out. Like these systems that just give that inherent trust layer that like I don't really need to get worried about this because I could just complain and someone else fix it. I don't have the answers to what those solutions are going to be, but that is really something that I feel like that is a benefit to the traditional financial ecosystem versus what crypto is lacking.
Any thoughts on how this group of people and those out there might be able to help improve that?
Yeah,
Well, make people more comfortable.
A system where there can be some clear recourse for if there's an error to have happened for that to be pulled back. And I don't know if the answer for that is some kind of smart contract style system where there's additional confirmations like days later, and if one party has a legitimate claim against that, something along those lines where we can where we can start to say like I'm not completely screwed if this doesn't go the right way.
Yeah, no, it is scary. I know, being involved in helping Calvin and formerly nChain doing investing, when we have to send investment funds and we like to invest by paying with Bitcoin, you're talking a decent chunk of money, and we always do a test transaction first of $1 or something like that to make sure you have the right wallet address. But then when you have to send the big amount, there's always that moment where and if
they don't get it right away, if they're supposed to have gotten it and they don't have it, it's like you're on the edge of your seat for the rest of the afternoon.
But especially with BTC, with the slow confirmation times.
Yeah.
Okay, in our few remaining minutes, I thought I'd ask you, what are things that you see for the future of Bitcoin SV in with financial institutions? What do you think is the best opportunity that we as an entire group of people can be thinking about and engaging with financial institutions to discuss, to pique their interest and get them involved?
I personally look at the opportunities where you have large flows of money. It's like a profit pool idea. What's the size of that profit pool? Is it significant? Is there a lot of money moving down that particular pool? Is the need high? Is it like a manufactured thing? You've just created this idea, or is there an actual need? And is the current friction and cost currently going through that particularly high, particularly expensive, etc.? So where you see those profit traps and profit pools, get busy. Get into there and don't design it, build it. Build it, try it out, because you're probably going to solve it the wrong way the first time around. But just try. So I think particularly find profit pools where you think there's money, go and get playing there.
Dave.
I think there's a massive opportunity in risk management and the linkage into auditability. Like one of the most spectacular parts about Bitcoin and SV in particular, the ability to have this very detailed audit trail, which when you really get this, we get the financial system operating on Bitcoin like this, the amount of fraud that can be either detected early or prevented completely. And then similarly, like a more robust audit as a practice has the ability to completely revolutionize the way we actually account for the financial system. Like this can be a cataclysmic change in how that's done.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that doesn't get enough attention in the Bitcoin world. The use of the Bitcoin blockchain for auditing and improving that. And it's probably because, it's not as sexy. It's kind of boring, the audit world, right? Sorry, any auditors out there. But it is such a huge potential use area for Bitcoin. And that is something that would make financial institutions a lot more comfortable in using its blockchain. Stephane.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going around this conference for the last like 36 hours, and even talking to Angus, clearly you guys are doing something right that's very well positioned for the financial services business because I've spoken to several entrepreneurs there that says we tried Ethereum, disaster. We tried BTC, too expensive, way too slow, and all that kind of stuff. And BSV works. So it's really the only option that we have for all the reasons that we're talking. And if these smaller use cases, right, if these other protocols can't solve these smaller use cases, even right now, can't get an app to work properly on Ethereum, it has no hope for the financial services business because
Needs scale.
This is
big scale.
It's like this is just puts everything else, makes it look like a mouse when you're talking to the size of transactions that these are doing. So from you guys, for your focus on scalability, it's perfect for the evolution of financial services.
Okay, well, that is a perfect note to end on. It's a real reminder of how it is time for Bitcoin to grow up and to grow up in a way that will support as well as make comfortable the needs of financial institutions. So thank Angus, David Washburn, and Stephane Ouellette for participating on this panel with me. Thank you. So now it's my privilege and great honor to play Bitcoin Oprah for some time. I am going to have a conversation with Dr. Craig Wright about the subject people ask him about all the time, but until today, he hasn't ever sat in one sitting and sort of told the story all at once. You've heard pieces of it, I'm sure, if you've watched some of his interviews, read some of his writings, but we're going to talk about it all today. So I'll give people a moment to come in and find some seats since we're getting a big influx of people. What? Right now? So please give a warm Satoshi shout out to Craig Wright. So Craig, I have some questions for you today.
I believe so.
Did you create Bitcoin?
Yes.
Why?
It actually goes way back into my past. I've been involved with monetary economics and everything for a long time. And before even the first bit I'll talk about, back in the 90s. In 2005, I enrolled with the University of Newcastle. I did a master's degree there. Part of why I chose that little out-of-the-way university was they had the Center for Monetary Economics. So the two of the people I learnt from while I was there, basically annoyed occasionally, were some of the founders of DigiCash and eCash. So they were academics who worked with David Shaum and helped develop the original aspects of cryptocurrency, helped launch Mark Twain Bank, and they were involved with that whole industry. So it might have been a little out of the way university, but it was a little out of the way university with some of the greatest people in cryptocurrency. And they ended up with this little out of the way university because everyone had thought that cryptocurrency can't work. They'd given up on it. And part of why I saw why Bitcoin needed to be different, why cryptocurrency had always failed, when you get to a certain size, law enforcement starts to be active. You start introducing people who use crime and are getting away with it. If it's an illegal system, if it's facilitating crime, if it's anonymous, eventually you get a bigger and bigger user base of people breaking the law, and then it gets shut down. And people don't seem to understand. There's no, it's distributed, it keeps going stuff. Liberty Reserve had 30,000 different nodes with bank accounts globally. And there was a takedown that was done across over 70 countries with law enforcement officials from over 100 different departments involving takedowns of people all across the world. Places like Sierra Leone, places like Costa Rica, places where no American jurisdiction is involved at all, were all taken down. All the money was seized. And the 6 billion seized in Liberty Reserve is more valuable than Bitcoin and cryptocurrency right now. This market cap crap, the reality is that was 6 billion real dollars. 6 billion real dollars would push Bitcoin up to 50,000 a Bitcoin.
So you obviously were aware of prior attempts to
Yes.
create digital cash by other people. What lessons or things did you learn from that, and how did you apply them into Bitcoin?
I came to understand that money requires traceability. Fungibility is in law. It's not something that's native. To be fungible, you have to actually have something that is received for valid consideration. There are things like source of wealth laws. So if you have Bitcoin and you can't explain where it came from, in Britain, in America, it's actually able to be seized. Because if you haven't paid tax, you can't explain where it's from. The law actually exists today for them to seize it. Right now. So there's no, oh, I'm okay, it's Bitcoin. And you can trace everything. I'm sorry, but there are already cases taking down dark websites. So all this Tor stuff protecting me, Tor gives you no protection. I'm sorry.
So let's dig in a little bit. Approximately what year, what point in time did you really begin working on Bitcoin?
I started on a failed, totally stupid concept back in the 90s.
Okay.
And I also had the concept of a paid sort of network. And all of it was a total screw up, fuck up, and whatever else that wasted lots of money and got nowhere.
Okay. And then when did you get, I suppose, the idea that really led to what Bitcoin is?
That really came about after a bit of time with Newcastle and the other. So it was a combination of the guys at Newcastle. Also, at the same time, I shortly after that started a master's degree in law where I studied international banking, financial law, etc., over at Northumbria. And then I started really understanding the history of money. Between that and the other aspect that sort of changed everything was in 2005, when I'm doing this, I had to get a real job because I don't know if everyone remembers, but there was a big crackdown on gambling. And I had a lot of involvement and a lot of clients in like Lassiter's and Playboy and whatever else that all shrank because the Americans stopped allowing SWIFT to be used globally. And
Even you're talking about the passage of the Ouija statute in the United States. Right?
And that really made all those clients suddenly not able to spend money and not grow. And I was quite upset because these were licensed casinos. They were acting legally in the law, but they were still being squeezed out.
So you were working with them and then you had to get a real job. What real job did you get at this time?
I started with BDO. I became an auditor. So I developed CATS, which is computer-aided audit techniques. I wrote software as anti-fraud detection and software to basically complete audits faster.
And so you were working on Bitcoin, I assume, at night or on weekends, and this was a side project?
All of the above. I actually sort of tried to talk some of the people into some of my projects in BDO. I ended up having one of my partners, Alan Granger, was a director of some of my companies for a while. But I had approached the company and I wanted to bring this into BDO. I said it would be great for audit. And I tried to explain that we could, for a few servers, we could set this stuff up that I'd developed. And they said, what the fuck, we're auditors, go away.
So walk us through the process just generally that you went through. Like, did you start writing? Did you just start trying to figure out the components of a technical system? Did you code first? Just tell, how did you work through this?
It was a combination of things. So the first part was actually figuring out, well, it's a dynamic Stackelberg game. What you're going to start seeing as the fee now disappears, as the subsidy disappears, the reward will actually become variable in time. Basically, it's a linear sawtooth function that is Poisson distributed. Now, what people don't understand there is because you get a low fee at the beginning of block discovery, and as it goes on, you get a higher fee, that's actually going to create a scenario that settles the time closer and closer to 10 minutes. Because if you think about it, someone's just discovered a block. That means they're not going to get many fees in the next block. So they'll turn hashing down and save power. Then as fees grow, they'll start turning hashing up. If it goes past 10 minutes, suddenly it's a big payment, and everyone, even those who aren't economical when they're thinking about mining, will start chucking in. But this only happens as the subsidy disappears. And the subsidy was thought of, like, because I did a bit of economics and whatever else, as similar to situations like South Korea. And you build nascent industries, but how do you get rid of the subsidy? So you just algorithmically get rid of the subsidy. You don't explain, hey, we're going to build you an ecosystem and then turn it away. We're just going to make the game set in the beginning.
What was the hardest thing or things for you to figure out?
Some of this actually changed right until October. So the fee reward and other aspects there were only finally decided in October 2008.
2008, right before the white paper was posted online?
Fairly much, yes.
Okay. So there have been other names associated with possible work on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have help?
Everyone has help.
Okay.
But was someone else Satoshi? No. Dave, I wouldn't be sane and whatever else without him.
You're talking about Dave Kleiman?
Yes. Hal Finney, the code wouldn't have kept going. It actually fell over in January 2009 several times before we found bugs. So if Hal hadn't jumped in, it would have never launched.
Okay. Anyone else?
Lots of other people gave me critique. Mike Hearn, Gavin, even Zuku, even people like Blue Matt, all these people, without their help, they just wouldn't have.
Did you give drafts of the white paper to other people to review and critique?
Yes.
Okay, many people or just a few?
More than one, less than 20.
Okay.
There were a number. Plus, I put it up on a site, upload.ae, which was actually run out of Instra in Melbourne. Luckily, that got taken down and whatever else, but Instra was running upload.ae out of Melbourne in August 2008. So we moved everything.
Did you write the white paper?
Yes.
How long did it take you?
It was a mess that got changed so many times, and there's so many iterations of it. There's lots of similar ones. It goes back years, but it also was a complete different product years ago. I actually had the concept of giving shares out to miners at one stage, but that doesn't work.
But you gave drafts of the white paper to people for review, critique?
Yes, I have.
Let's talk about the client software, version 0.1. Who wrote the code?
Most of it came from me. When I contacted Wei, he gave me a lot of cryptographic code. And
how did you contact Wei?
Email.
Only by email?
I don't think there was any other way with Wei. I'm pretty sure there wasn't.
All right. Did anyone else help you with the code?
Oh, of course. Bits were sent out in the early days. People reviewed it, people critiqued it, people said it sucked, people said it won't scale. James Donald sat there going, government will take it over.
How did you get Hal Finney and Dave Kleiman involved in helping you with this project?
Dave I'd known years. So Dave was my best friend for a long time. Hal and others, I was told by the guys at University of Newcastle. I mean, I asked, where should I send this? And I didn't say where do I send Bitcoin, but I mean, I was saying if I'm looking for information on cryptocurrencies and creating coins, where do I go? And their first comment was, don't bother, it's not worth it. And the next bit was, but you go to the peer-to-peer foundation, you go to the cryptography mailing list, and you send it out to these.
So let's talk about the name Satoshi Nakamoto. Did you choose that?
Yes.
Well, why Satoshi Nakamoto?
Well, Nakamoto was the main bit. Nakamoto comes to Tomasu Nakamoto. He was in the sort of the restoration period, Japan, as really, it was isolating itself and restricting. So around, but a little bit earlier than Adam Smith, he came up with a whole lot of concepts that are very similar. And he wrote, a lot of his works have been lost now, but he wrote about economics and the need to trade. And he wrote this as the shogunate was restricting and locking Japan in. And he becomes the forgotten sort of other side of the coin to Adam Smith. Adam Smith was in a country that was opening up and allowing trade and flourishing, as this other guy doing the same thing was in a country that was restricting, as government was clamping down, as he ended up being killed because of the ideas of free trade that he was promoting.
Why did you choose to use a pseudonym as opposed to posting the white paper or writing online as Craig Wright?
I had the stories I was told from the guys in the Monetary Engineering Center who told me all of the things that happened, all of the crackdowns, all of the problems that occurred. They told me when I talked to them about DigiCash and whatever else. So when I talked to people who had that background and were there, they told me nightmares.
Yeah. It'd be scary to
Yes.
do it on your own name. So where'd Satoshi come from? We covered Nakamoto, but Satoshi.
Satoshi is me being Australian and taking the piss out of things, because I read The Economist, and I remember their article, which actually does exist, from '88, with rising from the ashes. So the phoenix would rise and global money would take and hold, and we'd have one electronic money. And of course, at the same time, we have this silly thing called Pokemon, which people still run around, including Neil.
Yep. Good job, Neil, wherever you are.
Yeah, and some of us moved on. But most, until I started saying this, most people didn't realize Ash, the character there, he was actually called Satoshi in Japan.
Got it. So that's where Satoshi comes from. The Bitcoin.org domain name.
Yes.
Who registered that?
I did.
Why did you register that?
Because you need a domain to host things.
Okay. And good answer. Why did you want to put up a website?
How else do people find things? This is the internet. I worked for ISPs in '93. So, I mean...
Who created the content for the site?
Me. That's why it was so ugly.
Did you do the design yourself?
That's why everyone said it was so ugly.
Yeah. Satoshi wrote emails from an email address, satoshien@gmx.com.
Yes.
Who managed that email box?
Primarily me, until it got compromised, and now God knows who manages it.
Got it. What about posting a Satoshi on online message boards? Satoshi and people have, archived a lot of these online posts from the early days. Did you post a Satoshi on online message boards, or did more than one person?
No, that was generally me on those ones. Occasionally, Dave would interact. We had a few IRC communications, and he reviewed what I said. One thing I learnt, I had a good friend from SANS, Stephen Northcutt, who was one of the founders of SANS. I remember right back at the beginning, he told me, back at the beginning of Bitcoin, what I've got to do is, not about Bitcoin, but generally, walk away. So by that, I mean, I had to post something, create an answer, and walk away from it and come back. And so that's why I was always a lot calmer, because it's easy to get heated, and then you spend a bit of time, you walk away, and then you can post things later. You can plan them. It can be nice and calm.
Speaking of walking away, at some point, Satoshi walked away from the Bitcoin project.
No, I didn't.
Okay. How would you describe it?
I didn't walk away. I went off to prove that I wasn't wrong.
Okay. That's very Craig speak. What do you mean by that?
So what happened was Silk Road and a whole lot of other things, hundreds of other sites people haven't heard about, like Hydra and dark.web websites appeared. And they're not as nice as everyone likes to be led into believing. Contrary to popular belief, guns were sold on Silk Road, all sorts of things, nasty stuff. And
they started using Bitcoin.
And I honestly, I did this not thinking that it was going to be a crime coin. I thought...
Did that surprise you?
It shouldn't have, but it did, yes. Yeah. It saddened me. I actually thought I'd failed. I thought everything I've been doing for years, I thought this was my last attempt, my last time I will ever get to do this, and I thought I would absolutely failed.
Did you try to contact the operators on any of those sites, like Silk Road, to say, please stop using Bitcoin?
No, but I don't think that would have worked anyway. everyone was telling me this is what it's for. I had some of the current core guys telling me this is the reason for these things. This is good. This opposes government. James Donnell, the whole time, until he disappeared again, told me how the only way this works is if we take the sort of foundation out of government, which is...
But you did make a public plea to WikiLeaks to not use
Yes.
Bitcoin. Why did you do that, but not contact the other companies?
WikiLeaks isn't good journalism for a start, but in particular, they were being shut down from PayPal and blocked because they were releasing a whole lot of things that they shouldn't have, and I didn't want really to be the focus of that. We're talking 2010. Bitcoin hardly had a price. No one was using it. The only places you could do anything, use it, were Silk Road, which sucked at the end, where Liberty Reserve was starting to do it for crime. Everything was going the opposite of what I wanted. Everything was turning around and becoming everything I was trying to stop.
Let's talk about a few things in quick succession about Bitcoin system that I know I get asked a lot about, and I'm sure you do as well, but let's answer some of them. Why a proof of work consensus system?
Basically, proof of work is a way of actually signaling that can't be cheated. There's no other way. Anyone who owns a share, anyone who doesn't have to expend something provably that they can't get back can cheat. So I was talking about this on Slack the other day, and I talked people through a way that with something like a DAO, where it's a proof of stake system, you can halve and create a series of subcoins. So you start with 255 units, and then 128 of those can be set to control the majority. Then you halve that again, and each time you keep 51%. And what that allows you to do is have 51% of 51% of 51% that controls the entire network. So anonymously, in some sort of proof of stake system, you end up with 1 vote in 5 billion able to manipulate the entire system. And there's no way around that.
Okay, the 21 million coin circulation, fixed amount, where did that come from?
Bitcoin's an integer value. So people don't seem to realize that the decimal point's only in what you display in your wallet. There's a fixed decimal. And I believe things are probably getting better in some of the modern chips and whatever else, but the reality is there's only so much range before you start getting errors and rounding and processing, and you can't have processing errors, you can't have rounding errors. It's a little bit overly conservative. You could actually expand it out a couple bits, but it's better to be conservative and not perfect. I mean, after all, it's 2.1 quadrillion bits.
Okay, how about the average 10-minute block interval?
The average 10-minute block is a combination of propagation and discovery. So you've got to remember that you're trying to find and propagate blocks that have to have a lot of information. So what you're trying to do is not 1 meg in time, you're trying to do the world's global information. And if you start moving that too close, if you're doing it in 15 seconds, you actually have constraint periods. The natural limits on propagation globally become larger than the time to add transactions, and you hit a scale ceiling. So it's really a balance. I mean, I think the optimum was worked out at about 8.23 seconds or something like that, but 10 minutes is much easier to understand, it's much easier to work out. It just gets a bit wanky if you want to do 8.23 seconds or something.
Let's talk about the original Bitcoin scripting language and opcodes. How did you choose what opcodes to put in or not put in?
It's fairly much standard forth. So the difference is with some of the things I've started now that we've patented them, releasing like hash chains coupled with what we've deemed R-puzzle, etc. That allows you to have a means of securely proving functional loops that are done by other parties, so that you can only have a valid payment if you take the last calculated payment and put it into the next value. So you don't need to make sure that everything runs in a miner as a loop. What you need to make sure is that if anyone cheats, they lose their money. So it's still effectively a loop, because you cheat, you don't get paid.
Is there something you can tell us about Bitcoin that people don't understand that only Bitcoin's creator would?
Most of it.
Okay, come on, Craig.
Okay, so all of the things I've been starting to teach you. Bitcoin isn't PGP. That's the whole privacy model there. We don't treat keys as sacrosanct. And in fact, you can start doing things like using the actual encoded value of the R portion of a signature to then enable you to have different keys that can be added afterwards. So if I can create something where I'm going to say the value R is predetermined, and I can put that into a redeem script, that means the check on S is related to the key that you give after the fact. So like a hash puzzle where you put a solution in there, you can now put a key in there that solves a puzzle, allowing you to actually have users determine keys afterwards.
The Bitcoin white paper talks about SPV wallets, simplified
Yes.
payment verification. You feel like not enough attention's been placed upon that from the
Correct.
Bitcoin world, and in particular, the relevance development on the edges, something you mentioned to me recently.
Yes.
What is that? How is that
Okay,
relevant?
so Bitcoin is peer-to-peer, but every aspect is a separate peer-to-peer network. Miners form peer-to-peer networks. The problem is, in trying to make this simple, when I released the code, it was on Windows. Yes, I know, it was on Windows XP, it's horrible, move on. But the fact was, if I wanted everyone to be able to just download and start running things in the early days, I didn't want to make a Linux thing that only techies could run. I wanted anyone. So what we needed to do was start understanding that it needed to be split out into different functions. Your wallet is a peer-to-peer overlay network. I've said many times that Bitcoin is a Mandela network in implementation. Mandela networks are small world, ultra-connected graphs that form what is a giant node. These then have an overlay system that is a supplemental small world network. But they don't need to actually care about each other. What happens is in SPV, I have a transaction. I've been paid. I keep my transaction. Here's my transaction. That proves I've been paid. I now want to give Jimmy a transaction. I don't give Jimmy just the transaction. I give him the transaction and the one I received, both of them. Yes, it's a little bit extra, but we're only talking kilobytes. Jimmy now uses proper SPV, and all he does is keep the Merkle headers. The other part that I'm going to send him is the Merkle path. If I keep my transaction, I know where it's been mined. I have the Merkle path. I can give Jimmy my transaction and the Merkle root, and together, with only the header, Jimmy can prove that my transaction has never been spent before. The miners have validated that, and that's all he needs to know. The hash in that Merkle path, the tree structure, and the transaction together give him 100% assurance of that SPV transaction, as long as no one has broken SHA-256, and that's then safe.
Let's talk about the beginning of the blockchain. You mentioned earlier the code fell over. So blockchain started January 3rd, 2009, Genesis block. How was the Genesis block created?
Well, basically, you choose the code bit there, you choose the key, you just pre-compute it, you pop it in the code. So it was there as an anchor.
Okay.
So the nature of how it was actually constructed was to be an anchor so that every node wouldn't go out and calculate their own. And people say it's wasting 50 Bitcoin, but it's not wasting anything because there was no value at the time. I mean, we're talking no exchanges, no users. I mean, for the first few days, I was the only user, then Hell and Dave and a few other people jumped in. But if I'm the only user in this network running 69 machines.
Were there 69 machines on day one?
Yeah.
Okay. All yours?
Yeah.
Where were they?
Actually had a farm shed that I converted. So there were a combination. I had a house in Lisseroe where the garage had a number of...
this is in Australia.
Yeah, a number of sort of racks and everything like that. And I had a cow shed in Bagnu where we had laid fiber to get fast internet and all the rest. And that had more racks. So that was basically, because I had a cattle ranch, it ran up there and all the machines were. The other aspect that fell over that I needed to address was Microsoft and Patch Tuesday. Anyone remember Patch Tuesday? I really hadn't thought about running a bunch of standalone Windows XP machines until everything turned off at the same time. So that was another reason Bitcoin, before the current blockchain turned off, apart from crashing, literally on that Tuesday night, everything updated, turned off and restarted, and just caused a massive problem because the two things split and didn't sync. And I had not thought about that one. So that was the next part I had to do. I had to run around and I bought a whole lot of Microsoft licenses at excessive prices and installed a domain in there and a work group. And I set up a forest between my two locations and ran out all these machines, set up a WUS server, WSUS. For any Australians, we make fun of Microsoft because calling their servers a WUS. But we set up WUS servers, and Dave actually helped on some of that because I couldn't get it all done fast enough. I had to set up a full domain just to keep these Windows XP machines running so that we could say that they didn't actually all shut down at the same time, and I had to have rolling intervals. So
you're telling us Bitcoin started in a cowshed?
Yes.
Great, world money system. So code fell over when the blockchain started. Well, what happened? What was your reaction? What did you do?
Oh, fuck. I had to actually drive back and forward several hours, which was annoying. So my farm and my other house were 3 hours apart. So I actually had fights with the tax office over this because I had really big driving bills in that tax year because I had to drive back and forwards between my farm and all the rest. And, well, they weren't happy. I was spending, it was 3 hours drive there, 3 hours back, starting machines, all the rest. And they tried to argue that it was a hobby. They said, I actually had a fight with the tax office that Bitcoin was a hobby. I guess in some ways you could argue it was a hobby, but it was a hobby I spent all my money in. So,
how long did it take you to get the code back up working?
Most of that whole week. I don't know if I slept much. I went back and forwards and yabbered on to people, and lived on coffee and caffeine pills. That's when I discovered caffeine pills. I'd been stopping in truck stops and talking to truck drivers who basically gave me pills that I'm led to believe are caffeine.
What was happening with the blockchain during, well, I've seen you on those pills. So what was happening with the blockchain during this period of time?
It kept falling over.
Yeah.
I mean, that first week was just abysmal. I mean, this is why you got the Genesis block, and a week later, then suddenly things start mining.
So is that why there's the week gap?
Yes.
Okay. So at some point you left Bitcoin, the project, in the hands of Gavin Andresen, right?
Yes.
Why? Why him?
Gavin's a good guy. Gavin's good coder. I thought he would run with the project and keep it aligned. Gavin's fault is he's too nice. I'm not trying to take away from him, but there are a lot of people who had other ideas, and Gavin's problem was he was too nice. One of the things I told Gavin at the end was, stop trying to make me into this shadowy figure, which was what everyone kept doing. Of course, I didn't help myself by not actually being known, but that's what I begged him anyway.
Is there anything that Gavin Andresen would know from his interactions with Satoshi Nakamoto that no one else would?
Yes.
Anything you can share?
I'll leave that to Gavin. Gavin and I, the reason he came over wasn't because of what everyone thinks. Gavin and I talked before he came over to London for our little session. And I explained, this is how you see me.
This is a proof session you did with him.
Yes. But before that, we'd been emailing, and I spoke to Gavin and I said, this is how you see me write as Craig Wright. This is what you see as Satoshi. This is the difference. This is why the difference.
So a lot of people out there ask, and they ask me all this time, why won't Craig just prove he's Satoshi Nakamoto? Why won't he just sign transactions using using keys from certain blocks people talk about? Why?
There are lots of reasons there, but it's important to lock this down properly first before anything like that happens, because that's not proof, that's possession. And a lot of people want this concept of coder's law. I'm not going to do anything like that until I've proven through real means. Evidence is court, it's people. Bitcoin is not about taking people out of the system. It's not BitGold, it's not eGold, it's none of those things. It's a system that enables people to interact. The simple thing that we talked about was escrow. Escrow could allow something as simple as a court. The two parties here, Jimmy and I, can negotiate and say, we want this court, and we want British law, or we want American law, and we could actually choose that and have an individual. But more in the future, we can start creating new things that have never existed. With Bitcoin, we can have a system that is the two of us agree, or one of us and a community function. For instance, we could set up a voting system as an arbitrator. We could outsource, say we're a medical body. We could then say, this medical body, the members who are all qualified, who are peers, can vote. So rather than the AMA the way it is, those people who are qualified medical people could set up their own organization that can be recognized by people, that has standards, that can vote, and that can be an arbitrator that we can choose. Or there can be a competing version, and we can be with that.
If you could change one thing about your journey with Bitcoin since the beginning, or one thing you've done or not done, what would that be?
There have been lots of bumps in the road, lots of hard times, but I still wouldn't change anything, because we're at the point now where we're scaling, where things are working, And if I could go back and say my life would be easier, I still wouldn't do that because I don't know that it would end up where it is now, where we are actually starting to work.
What has your Bitcoin journey taught you about people?
They're crazier than I ever thought.
And I know you're very close with your family. People don't see you in that light, unlike how I and your friends see you. What's the thing that has most affected you and your family with this Bitcoin journey?
A lot of these attacks really hurt my family. And I shouldn't have to go out there if I'm not, this whole hypocrisy. Craig Wright won't show us his degrees. Craig Wright won't do this. Why? I'm not asking for money from you. I'm not asking for a job. Do you know what the definition of privacy is? It means if I go to you asking for something, I prove based on what I'm asking. I don't go out to the world and pull my pants down and show you everything I've got. It doesn't work that way. That's not private. I'm not Neil. I don't flash. Sorry, Neil.
There's always the party tonight. So we keep them private, but in this moment, if there's something you could say to your wife and family, what would it be about how they have supported you with Bitcoin?
All of my family are wonderful, especially my wife. My wife is unbelievable. There's no other way to put it. Not many other people would put up with me. I'm better than I was. I'll never be nice. I spent too many years working in back rooms, in universities, in ivory towers, and that isolated me from people as I was learning. And people still scare me. And I don't get on, I'm not good with groups, I'm learning. I'm getting better. When I first came out, it scared me shitless. Groups, crowds, and everything like that, I'm not good with. I'm good with one or two people. I'm good standing at the front of a conference and running off and disappearing, which before Bitcoin, if you're at any conference I presented at, that's what you saw. Academic guy, paper, gone. I get to know family. I have one or two good friends, and that's it. I'm not egregious. I don't go out there and have everyone like me. But my wife still handles that, and my kids are there. And she makes the right excuses for me when I blow people off at parties. And she makes sure that people understand, yes, it's just Craig. So, thank you.
There's so much more that can be said and discussed, but we'll wrap this conversation and maybe we'll have another one another time soon, Craig. Thank you for your candor and honesty. And on behalf of all of those who are in the Society of Bitcoin and BSV, I will say thank you, my friend.
Thank you all. Really, at the end of the day, you're what's going to make this work, not me. I can deliver you a base protocol, but people don't want a base protocol alone. They need applications, and they need things that are pretty, and they need things that are working. And we'll make sure that the protocol is there and scales. And I can do plumbing. And I can be in the background making sure my team are doing plumbing. And we'll deliver you stable plumbing. And from that, you can build things that will amaze me, that will amaze everyone. And you don't know how much doing that means to me. Things like Money Button, things like Handcash, things like all the submissions that we've been seeing lately, extending all of this for me and taking it further. And we're going to give you tools to make it even more than that. And the only real reward I want from this is you to take that and build something better, not Coder's law. I don't want a world where we isolate people. Yes, I've got a PhD in computer science and economics. And yes, I also have a degree in theology. You can do both. I know Silicon Valley thinks that's not possible. But I don't want a world where we have people isolated by machines. I want a world where they're integrated. I want a world where people are paid to be part of everything, so that they will be, so that it's not tragedy of the commons, so that everyone can be part of something they can be proud of. People stop being proud when they got government handouts, because when you're on the dole, when you're on a basic income that's equal, you don't have anything to be proud of. You didn't create anything. You didn't build anything. You're not part of anything. When you get a handout from government and you're taught that you're worthless, you end up thinking you're worthless. I saw this when I was doing pastoral stuff in Central Coast and whatever. And I saw it when I was in Africa. People need a chance to interact, even if it's small. So some of the things you've seen today, some examples like where you can have an app on your phone and you're just a little part, but you're a part. That's what society is. When you're being paid to run a peer app to do something, not Amazon's getting paid to do everything for you. Not Google's being paid to do everything for you. Not Facebook's being paid to do everything for you. Not bots, but people. Not a world where we talk about everyone being replaced by autonomous cars that don't exist and probably won't in my lifetime. But people paying for services, paying for goods, and having augmented systems that help us interact better. That's what I see as a society built on Bitcoin. And I thank you for actually helping make that dream for me.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to ask you to stay here and help me present the Hackathon finalists. Come right here.
Okay.
Right here. All right. It's time to close the conference now with, speaking of inspiring the next generation and turning it over to all of you and those around the world who would build upon this platform. Let's welcome to the stage our finalists again from the BSV Hackathon. It's time to announce our winners. Let's give them a round of applause. Come on stage. You guys ready? Come over here. I'm going to keep you with me. Stand here. All right. Helping me to present the results is Steve Shatters, Chief Technology Officer of nChain. Steve, you ready to do this, Steve?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. Do you have the envelopes, please?
I have the envelopes.
Okay.
Do you want to flourish?
All right. Are we ready for this? Now, as I announce the results, we're going to be seeing, where the funds went, if they got funds yet. So give me, let's find out who is third place. All right, here we go. Steve, you're so good. You're my new Vanna. All right, we need a drum roll, please, people. Our third place finalists, receiving 50 BSV coins, Polyglot. All right, and you have your wallet? I think you've got your what wallet do you have today? Hand cash?
Hand cash.
Woo! Don't spend that all at once. Congratulations. Thank you. Second place. Now, when I announce the second place winner, you'll know who's first, but we're going to give the second place winner our undivided attention and exuberation, right? Absolutely. Our second place contestant is receiving 100 BSV coins. You want to read this?
Tonic Pow.
Thank you. And what wallet are you using today?
I'm using Centbee.
I hope you're going to share that with your team.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you
very
for your
much.
submission.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
And that, of course, means that our first place, well, I don't need this to tell you, our first place winner of the first ever BSV Hackathon, walking home with a whopping 250 BSV coins.
Uptime SV.
Woohoo! Congratulations. Who's got a wallet here? And what wallet are you using today? Relay X, great. Congratulations to all of our hackathon finalists. All right, thank you. I'll send you guys off stage. Thank you very much. Thank you. You stay here with me. Great, thank you. So that brings us to an end. I hope you've had an exciting time in Toronto. How was CoinGeek Toronto? As I said at the beginning, we have come and convened here in Toronto at a critical moment in the history of Bitcoin. I'm so thrilled all of you were here to not just learn and meet each other, but to feel what is, I truly believe, a family being created in addition to a society around the world, supporting the original vision of Bitcoin, Satoshi vision. We'll see many of you, I hope, for the next one, B Society. Great job. We'll see many of you, I hope, for CoinGeek Asia, first week of October, where we continue the journey to create the world's new money and global enterprise blockchain. I want to conclude now the way I began, by leaving with you some thoughts about our experience all together with Bitcoin. And I think I have a video coming on to help me with this experience one more time. It should mean even more to you now, I hope, because I think our experience today reminds us, especially Craig in particular, after what you've told us, that you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides. Just like hopes of Craig springing high, still, I'll rise. Did you want to see Craig broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by his soulful cries? I don't think so. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise, you rise, we rise, Satoshi rises, and Bitcoin rises. Thank you, and see you tonight. What?